And our other keynote now is Ambassador Kurt Volker, a distinguished fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, a former US ambassador to NATO, and a former permanent representative of the US on the North Atlantic Council. Please welcome Mr. Volker. There you are.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious that probably the last thing you want right now is another keynote address. It's been a long day and a lot of talking, but I do have a few things that I want to say, and I'll try to be succinct about them. But I think it's important. We're here in Hungary, and we're talking about Ukraine. And one of the things that I feel, I detect when I'm here is I kind of feel that Hungary is surprising me. It ought to be a country, a people, something that I know well, I understood. I lived here in the 90s. I've had many, many friends over many years. And I would expect to find in Hungary a great deal of concern and sympathy for what the Ukrainians are going through, and a demand for strategy about how do we establish and build a sustainable, just peace in Europe for all Europeans. And I'll tell you where I think this is headed after that, but I want to spend a few minutes talking about this Hungary dimension. If you go out this hotel, as many of you know, and you just go down to the river and you look across, you see this statue of a Madár overlooking the Danube, the bird, great bird, that led the Hungarians to this Pannonian Basin, the Carpathian Basin, all the tribes here, and that was over 1,100 years ago. And Hungarians lived here and survived here against all odds. You have Slavs, you have Germans, you have Turks, an occupation by Turkey of over 150 years. You had Tatar invasions. You had the Austrians and the Russians ganging up and suppressing a revolution here in Hungary. You had occupation forces and an imposed government from the Soviet Union. But somehow, Hungarians managed to maintain. They maintained their language, culture, identity, their spirit, their love of freedom, their determination that they would survive, they would be Hungarians, they would be here. And I admire that. I understand that. I've seen that. I feel that. And so I just ask my Hungarian friends to understand that this is exactly what your Ukrainian neighbors are going through, except it's not settled in their case. They are fighting. They've had their bouts of occupation by different powers. They were incorporated into the Russian Empire as a victory in battle for the Russians. They were incorporated in the Soviet Union. They suffered the Holodomor and the effort to systematically starve out Ukrainians. They were attacked and had their territory taken in 2014. And many in the West were telling them, don't worry, don't fight, we'll take care of this. Budapest Memorandum was mentioned earlier in the conference today. Don't worry, we'll take care of that. Well, we've let them down. Well, Hungarians know something about that. Moderator for our next panel, sitting in the corner there, is István Gyarmati, told a wonderful joke when I was in an official capacity here. We had an Assistant Secretary of Defense coming for the first time to talk about military presence in Hungary, bases here, NATO membership. And István said, you know, we in Hungary, we had a revolution in the 1700s, and we were hoping that our British friends or French or someone would come, but no one ever came. And then we had our revolution in 1848, and we were hoping that someone would come here and help us, but no one ever came. Then we had our revolution in 1956, and we were hoping that America or Britain or somebody would come. And now here we are in 1996, and you came. So I understand that feeling of fighting for freedom and also that feeling of needing help from abroad. I can imagine Ukrainians in February of 2022, as Russia had amassed hundreds of thousands of forces surrounding their country, and then they started pouring in, not just in the east where there had been a stalemate, but from the north, from the south, from sea, from air, from land. And I can imagine my Ukrainian friends taking a deep breath, looking at each other, saying, Ita zide, most vad shoha. Rabadunk ledjunk, vad sabadok. This is the time. Now or never. Will we be free or will we be slaves? Ukrainians chose freedom, just as Hungarians did, just as we all have in this room. They're fighting for their freedom. They are looking for help from the rest of us. They will fight. They will do their part. They are doing their part. But as I stand here in Budapest, I feel we need to have sympathy. We need to have concern. We need to have strategy. And we need to recognize that in the world in which we live, anyone's fight for freedom is our fight. If freedom is extinguished anywhere, that is extinguishing freedom a little bit at a time for all of us. So that is what I see as the stakes here, and what I hope that we see. Sebastian Gorka, when he spoke earlier today, I think was very direct, very eloquent. He talked about the scars on his father's wrists. There are scars on people in Ukraine just like that today. He talked about whether we have the will to defend our civilization. Well, we need to recognize that in standing up against evil, what Putin is doing in Ukraine is evil. And we have to fight for our civilization. That is what this is about. Famous Hungarian American who I had the privilege of knowing, as many of you did as well, Tom Lantos, is famous for saying that the veneer of civilization is razor thin, and we are its guardians, and we must never rest. I worry that in the United States, in Europe, the European Union, and NATO, we're just wishing that we could rest, and we are not standing up to guard our civilization as we must. Now that's my philosophical, moral, emotional pitch to you. Looking at the real world where we are, there is an effort led by President Trump to stop this war, to stop this fighting. I'm glad he's doing that. We were drifting. I don't believe it will be successful yet. I believe that Vladimir Putin believes that he can keep fighting, that he can try a spring offensive. He can see whether the West gets tired. He can see whether he can defeat more Ukrainians. He can try any number of things, and he can last for a while. So while we should pursue diplomacy, while we should pursue an end to the war, we also have to recognize that it's going to take a bit more. It's going to take more pressure, more pushback. Zsolt, name it, when he was here this morning, was talking about there's no military solution. It's going to be a war that is ended by diplomacy. Well, I've been a diplomat for many, many years. If you have two parties who want to reach a solution, diplomacy can help. If you have two parties and one of them believes it can defeat the other party, no diplomacy can help. It will take force and pushback to change the playing field, to change the balance of forces, the calculation that that party is making. And if there is then the idea that you could have at least a ceasefire or some peace, then diplomacy can kick in and be helpful, but not until then. So we need more than diplomacy right now. And I also think that we need to recognize that even if we get a ceasefire, Putin's evil, abduction of children, torture and murder of civilians, executions, mass graves, bombing children's hospitals, bombing maternity clinics, bombing civilian infrastructure deliberately. That's not something that we can just say, well, we can work with that. We can't. We mustn't. We have to hold Russia accountable for that. And therefore, what we need to do is not only get an end to the fighting, but we need to lean in. If we are lucky enough to get a ceasefire this year, as I hope we are, and as President Trump is trying very hard to get, we need to lean in and use the time that a ceasefire provides better than Putin. We need to work on strengthening Ukraine militarily so that it is too difficult to target. We need to focus on helping Ukraine recover economically as quickly as possible. We need to accelerate talks between Ukraine and the European Union with whatever carve-outs are necessary. I'm not suggesting this is easy for the European Union and the markets that we have, but let not that be a reason not to. Let that be something we have to work hard and fast to figure out. Because ultimately, Putin will never change his goals. Putin has stated them explicitly. He wants to eliminate Ukraine as a sovereign and independent state. He wants to eliminate Ukrainian as a national identity, as a language, as a culture, as a people. He denies that Ukrainians are separate from Russians. This is what the Hungarians survived in the Pannonian Basin for over 1,000 years, maintaining the right to be Hungarian. Putin is determined to take away Ukrainians' right to be Ukrainian. So if we do get a ceasefire by the end of this year, we all need to lean in as quickly and as hard as possible to help them preserve their right to be Ukrainian and deny Putin the opportunity to eliminate it. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.